Well, today we gather together on this July 4th weekend, the eve of our 246th birthday as a nation. Any objective observer must admit that this nation has been blessed really like no other. On this July 3rd, allow me to begin the second installment of last week's message by saying the general principles on which the fathers achieved independence were the general principles of Christianity. I will avow that I then believed and now believe that those general principles of Christianity are as eternal and immutable as the existence and attributes of God. You see, the Christian religion is, above all the religions that ever prevailed or existed in ancient or modern times, the religion of wisdom, virtue, equity, and humanity. For I have examined all religions, and the result is that the Bible is the best book in the world. And I guess I should mention, before I'm accused of plagiarism, that these statements are not mine. In fact, they are the statements of a founding father, one of which was a diary entry, and the others were written to another founding father. These are statements by one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, one of two signers of the Bill of Rights, and the second President of the United States, John Adams himself, in letters, two of them, in letters to none other than Thomas Jefferson. Though they're not original with me, I do agree with them. You see, those who founded the nation, in spite of the revisionist history that we are seeing in so many places, they try to deny it. But our nation, at the time of its founding and its continued welfare, rest upon the recognition of the reality of the God of the Bible and the guiding values and principles of Christianity. As we begin, watch this. Our theme for the year is new beginnings, and our theme verse is 2 Corinthians 5:17. And speaking of new beginnings, our nation in many ways has an opportunity because of the Supreme Court decision related to Roe versus Wade and the overturning of that decision, or that case. We have an opportunity for a new beginning as a nation. As we talked about last Sunday, we as Christians, those of us who are truly born again, we should be rejoicing over that decision. Now, as you recall, last week I reminded you of the message from January's Sanctity of Human Life Sunday. And you recall it was a sermon based on Solomon's prayer for wisdom in order to be the kind of king that would lead Israel in an honorable, discerning way. Allow me to read the historic account of this event, again from 1 Kings chapter 3, by way of reminder as we introduce the message today. Picking up in verse 5 of 1 Kings chapter 3, again, verse 5, at Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask, what shall I give you?" And Solomon said, "You have shown great mercy to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in truth, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart with you. You have continued this great kindness for him, and you have given him a son to sit on his throne as it is this day. Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David. But I am a little child. I do not know how to go in or come out, and your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to be numbered or counted. Therefore, give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours?" The speech pleased the Lord, and Solomon had asked this thing. Then God said to him, "Because you have asked this thing, and have not asked long life for yourself, nor have asked riches for yourself, nor have asked the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern justice, behold, I have done according to your words. See, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before you, nor shall any like you arise after you. And I have also given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be anyone like you among the kings all your days. So if you walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days." As you'll recall, we looked at this story in 1 Kings 3 and the verses to follow, and we observed a few things. We noticed that when it comes to the sanctity of human life, we need more leaders who truly love the Lord. We need more leaders who understand God's role in our history and the life of our nation. We saw that we need more leaders who apply godly wisdom to real life circumstances. And we saw that we need more leaders who recognize the value and sanctity of human life. We need more leaders who are known for their godly wisdom and their support for justice, even for the least of these. And we observed that what happened on Friday, July 24th at the Supreme Court of the United States, when it overruled Roe versus Wade, is that we finally had some individuals with backbone and character who recognized injustice that had been done and were willing to take the heat to do what's right. If you read the opinion written for the majority by Judge Alito, it also recognized the right to abortion is not found in the Constitution, nor as part of the history of the United States. In fact, the majority of states had laws against abortion prior to Roe versus Wade. By the way, the 5 who voted to overturn Roe versus Wade were Justices Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. We need to pray for them. We need to pray for their protection. There have been protesters at some of their homes. There's concern. We need to pray for their safety. We need to pray for their continued wisdom. We need to pray that they will do what God would have them to do. And we need to pray that if there's those who do not know Christ as Savior, that they come to know Him as Savior. But we need to pray for these men. Again, on this weekend, as we celebrate our nation's independence and our freedoms and our life, liberty, and the opportunity to pursue happiness, we're rejoicing that the court stood up for the most basic of freedoms, the right to life. We rejoice for many reasons, and we talked about some of those last week. We're rejoicing for one reason, because human life is sacred. As Genesis 1:27 says, "For God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them." By the way, that answers the gender question too. Secondly, we also mentioned we're rejoicing because God has answered decades of prayer. There are scriptures you see there on your handout. For decades, those of us who have been involved in the pro-life movement, we have prayed for this day to come. It was a miracle. It was a miracle. We rejoice because America is safer for the unborn, safer today than it was Thursday a week ago. Another reason we rejoice is because the federal government desanctioned a national sin. It's one thing for individuals to commit sin, but when a nation sanctions it, that's a whole other level and raises a whole lot of concerns. As we noted, Isaiah 5 verses 20 and 21 say this: "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight." Isaiah saw a perversion of values in his nation, a world that was upside down, that was distorted, a culture that had problems with what it respected and what it hated. It was a world where sin was rewarded and righteousness was renounced. We live in that same kind of culture right now. Hopefully, what happened at the Supreme Court is an opportunity to reverse some of that thinking. We rejoice because righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. That's Proverbs 14:34. So that's the review this morning, and we're going to pick up with other reasons that we're rejoicing. Why are we rejoicing? We're answering that question first today. Why are we rejoicing? We rejoice because the United States has moved a step closer to following the rule of law. We've moved a step closer to following the rule of law. Am I saying we weren't following the rule of law when it came to abortion? That's true. That's true. Proverbs 28, verses 4 and 5, they tell us this: "Those who forsake the law praise the wicked, but such as keep the law contend with them. Evil men do not understand justice, but those who seek the Lord understand all." Now, we understand that this passage is specifically dealing with the law of God, the commandments of God. We understand that. But notice what it says. It says, "Those who forsake the law praise the wicked." We see the wicked praised daily. If you have a phone, you see the wicked praised almost every moment. Notice it says, "Evil men do not understand justice." There is evil. And those who are evil, those who do not follow God's commands, those who do not follow the law, they do not understand justice. One source noted about this particular passage, when people disobey the law and the Lord, their sense of uprightness and morality is perverted. They find it difficult even to understand justice. On the other hand, the righteous, those who seek the Lord, have a keen sense of justice. Believers, that's one reason that you get frustrated when you watch the news. When you hear stories, when you listen to certain podcasts or you hear certain things and people say things, because you have a sense of justice, and it bothers you when evil is praised. It bothers you when people are harmed with disregard for their welfare. We need to understand something this morning. We cannot expect the ungodly, the evil, if you will, those who reject God and His Word, we cannot expect them to stand up for what's right. They do not understand some of the most basic concepts of life and justice. And that leads us to the next really closely related point this morning. We rejoice because individuals in power were finally willing to take a stand for right. We rejoice about that. Proverbs 29 verse 2 says this, "When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked man rules, the people groan." I mean, it's so basic, isn't it? We are blessed that a majority of those justices on the Supreme Court were willing, after 50 years of genocide and terrorism against the unborn, to recognize the fallacy and error upon which Roe versus Wade was based. The Constitution does not provide for the freedom to murder innocent children, even at the hand of a doctor or at the request of a mother. In fact, for those who are Christian, even as we saw in the story of Solomon's wisdom and his interaction in 1 Kings chapter 3 with two mothers who were fighting over one living baby, it should be unfathomable to us for a mother to seek to kill her child. That should be beyond our comprehension. As we mentioned last week, by the way, and we'll say it again, we are sensitive to the issues. We're sensitive to single mothers and struggling families. We're sensitive to the rare cases where individuals have become pregnant through rape or incest. However, as I pointed out last week, according to a USA Today article from May 24, 2019, even the liberal pro-choice Guttmacher Institute reported that only 1% of all abortions were the result of a pregnancy because of rape, and less than 0.5% were the result of incest. So again this morning, while our hearts go out to any woman, anywhere who has been victimized in some way or another, creating another victim of the baby she carries is not the answer. Some would even argue that encouraging a woman to abort their own child, the living human being they carry, is also victimizing the mother once again. Again, let me remind you what we read just a moment ago, Proverbs 29:2. "When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when a wicked man rules, the people groan." You see, we need righteous individuals in authority. We need to seek out righteous individuals, godly individuals, yes, even Christian individuals, to serve in city, county, state, local, and federal political and judicial positions. Amen. We need this. I agree with the founder, and you saw a quote from the original Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, John Jay. Again, he said, "Providence has given to our people the choice of their rulers, and it is the duty, as well as the privilege and interest of our Christian nation, to select and prefer Christians for their rulers." So am I saying we should find out if politicians are Christians and vote for them, at least in part based on that? Yes, absolutely. Should their religion play a role in their governing? Absolutely. If secularism can play a role in the ungodly's perspective and their ruling, Christianity can play a part in a Christian's governing. We need godly leaders. By the way, it's not just in the political arena where we need godly leaders. It's all areas. All areas. Business leaders, and teachers. I mean, we need godly leaders throughout every strata of society. For apart from God, the concept of justice, as we have seen, will be distorted and lost. The essence, the DNA of our nation, this democratic republic, will not survive as a nation that God has blessed apart from the values of Christianity. It just won't. Moving on this morning regarding the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe versus Wade, we rejoice because hopefully this will help restore the culture, or to the culture, the recognition of the sanctity of human life. And we have to understand, and the protesters, we could anticipate that people would protest. That's not a surprise, because for 50 years, there has been this freedom to kill the unborn. So we shouldn't be surprised in some ways that people are protesting. But hopefully this is a step toward restoring the concept to our culture that life is sacred. Last week we read from Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, the historical account of creation, how God made man and woman in his image. Life is valuable to God. And by the way, it's so valuable that he established capital punishment for those who commit murder. Genesis chapter 9, verses 5 and 6, it gives us a portion of a conversation God had with Noah and his sons after God judged the wickedness of the world with a global flood. Genesis chapter 9, verses 5 and 6, it says, "Surely for your lifeblood I will demand a reckoning. From the hand of every beast I will require it, and from the hand of man, from the hand of every man's brother, I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man." God said life is so precious. The only way to respond to the deliberate, if you will, first-degree murder of the innocent is the taking of the murderer's life. There are those who are pro-life who oppose capital punishment, but that undermines the sanctity of human life. One source explained the idea in this passage this way. Because of the flood's destruction of life, people might begin to think that God holds life cheap and assume that taking life is a small matter. This covenant shows that life is sacred and that man is not to destroy man who is made in the image of God. In essence, then, this covenant was established to ensure the stability of nature. It helped guarantee the order of the world. People would also learn that human law was necessary for the stability of life, and that wickedness should not go unchecked as it had before. So human government was brought in. I find that interesting. I've mentioned before, I was fortunate to be raised in a church where speaking up for the rights and lives of the unborn was a priority. Our pastor was very involved in the pro-life movement as I was growing up. I've been involved in the pro-life movement since Roe versus Wade. I had the opportunity to serve as executive director of Moral Majority and chairman of Missouri's Moral Majority, and then it became Liberty Federation. Dr. Falwell led the national organization. One of the concerns from virtually day one was the acceptance of abortion would promote a culture of death and impact the view of the sanctity of human life, not just for the unborn, but in the lives of the elderly and the disabled as well. My mother and father took care of my grandmother for years prior to her death. And I've shared this before, but as you know, my mother passed away just a couple months ago, but she had to fight for the life of my grandmother with doctors and healthcare professionals. She even asked me to have a conversation with one of those doctors as well, one of the most unpleasant experiences I've ever had. Not only that, but again, you can see Mother holding my son Lincoln. Lincoln had physical issues. He had leukodystrophy, as most of you know. But we were trying to discuss the situation with a pediatric doctor at a well-known children's hospital in Missouri when the subject of a feeding tube was mentioned. And he virtually cut us off and said, well, starvation is not a bad way to die. Starving a child or an elderly individual or a disabled individual, starving them to death, is not a Christian biblical response. And yet that happens often in our culture. And I do believe abortion has contributed to that attitude. It's come to the point that not only the unborn, but the elderly and disabled should fear for their lives in many ways. Even Christians, or at least born-again individuals who claim to be Christian, seem to have bought into the ungodly idea that the quality of life determines just how sacred life really is. But life is sacred, as they say, from the womb to the tomb. From the time of conception to the time of natural death. And if Christians do not speak up for the sanctity of human life, let me ask you, who will? Who will? If we don't, who will? And by the way, let me have you watch this just as a reminder of what we know. Because even apart from Christianity, science tells us a whole lot about the unborn. Watch. Life is a miracle, but it seems that many want to argue against the science. Many pro-abortionists, in many ways, are the flat earthers of reproductive health. They deny the truth of science, the reality of what we know about human life, scripturally and scientifically. Moving on, we rejoice because we have been reminded elections matter, and we, the people, determine, and by the way, will give account for, the political leaders who govern them. In America, we can't just say, well, that's the government doing that. We are the government. We pick our leaders. And as someone has said, too often we get the leaders we deserve. Again, I'll remind you of Proverbs 11, verses 10 and 11. When it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices. And when the wicked perish, there is jubilation. By the blessing of the upright, the city is exalted, but it is overthrown by the mouth of the wicked. Now that verse, or those verses, they don't speak directly to elections. But it does speak to the idea we talked about earlier that we need godly leaders. And in America, we have the privilege of electing the kind of leaders we want. We need to understand something. Political parties, by the way, matter. And platforms matter. I hear too often Christians say, well, I just vote for the individual. You need to know what they stand for. You need to know what the platform is. We need to understand that the pro-life judges who decided to overturn Roe versus Wade were all appointed by pro-life Republican presidents, even though we currently have a pro-choice Democratic president. You see, elections matter. In our nation, we've been blessed to be governed by those whom we elect. And our president has the power to appoint Supreme Court justices. And of course, they are to be approved by a majority of the Senate. Supreme Court justices serve for life or until they choose to step down or health issues cause it to be a necessity. But the results of previous elections are why we saw what we saw happen last week. As far back as George H.W. Bush in 1991, he's the one who appointed Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court. That made a difference. We need to think about our choices and the future when we go to the ballot box. By the way, regarding elections, before elections, we should pray that God's will is done. And then after individuals are elected, no matter whether they are the ones we wanted or not, we need to pray for our leaders. 1 Timothy chapter 2, beginning in verse 1 says this, "Therefore I exhort, first of all, that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings, and all who are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and reverence. For this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth." Moving on, number 10, we rejoice because God is pro-life. God is pro-life. Life is sacred. We know that. God is the author and creator, the giver of life. God is pro-life. As the psalmist wrote in that familiar passage, Psalm 139, picking up in verse 13, he said, "For you formed my inward parts, you covered me in my mother's womb, and I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Your eyes saw my substance being yet unformed, and in your book they all were written, the days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them." God is pro-life. His children need to be pro-life. So, moving on to another question, what are some myths that need to be cleared up? What are some myths that need to be cleared up? First of all, one myth is this: abortion is a political and or a medical issue, and churches and Christians should not have a voice. That's a myth. That's a myth. Abortion is not merely a political issue where the church shouldn't be involved. It's a moral, it's a social, it's a spiritual issue, and it reaches far beyond mere politics. Not only that, but religious people are citizens, and we have the right to participate in the political process. I would argue we have an obligation to do so. As John Jay said, we have a duty to look for Christian leaders. There are references that I listed related to, that are from Ezekiel, and they point to the obligation that Ezekiel had to warn the people of God's judgment. And then the Matthew passage tells a story of John the Baptist, who, if you read the story, notice he went to prison not because he said Jesus Christ is Lord, but because he told the political leader, "You're immoral to have your brother's wife." He spoke up against the immorality of Herod. And I think I said brother, I think it's father actually when you read the account, Matthew chapter 6. You can look at that. Another myth, pro-lifers oppose women's rights, or pro-lifers hate women. Sometimes you hear that myth. We love you enough to tell the truth. We love you enough to tell the truth. We love you enough to tell you that the unborn is not just a mass of tissues, it's a human being. And by the way, pro-lifers, we are pro-choice. I am pro-choice. I respect human beings, including women, enough to believe that they can behave responsibly when it comes to the choices they make, including who they sleep with and by whom they become pregnant. We respect you enough to say that, hey, you can make good choices. So we are pro-choice. The choice is made prior to time to consider abortion. Choice is made before that. By the way, Christianity has been beneficial to women, unlike other religions and other cultures. Just a couple of examples are the references that I have there. Mary, of course, was a woman, had the blessing of carrying Jesus Christ into this world as his earthly mother. The first witnesses for the resurrection were women. Christianity has elevated women in so many ways. Another myth, no one has the right to tell me as a woman what to do with my body. No one has a right to tell a woman what she can do with her body. Exodus 20:13 says, thou shalt not murder. This is not, by the way, just about women's bodies. It's about the bodies of the unborn children that they are carrying. The DNA is different, by the way. And by the way, in some cases, many cases, it is right and it is ethical to tell you what you may or may not do with your own body. The law is designed to protect the innocent from those who would do them harm. I would argue that most of our laws are designed to tell us what we can and cannot do with our bodies. We're not to steal. Well, that's got to do with my body. We're not to assault individuals. Can I assault somebody? It's my body. Can I do that? We're not to speed or run stoplights. Well, can I do that with my body, my car? I'm in my body, in my car. Can I do what I want? Well, no, because it may harm others. That's what laws do. And abortion harms another. It's not just about your body. It's about the body of the unborn. We're not to murder. We're not to kill, because that's the ultimate harm to another. Fourth, another myth. The Supreme Court took away a woman's constitutional right to abortion. Again, the Bible says, you shall not murder. No constitutional right was taken away from women. It never existed. It was written into the court's decision 50 years ago in Roe versus Wade, but it does not exist in the Constitution. It was read into it and it did not belong there. So there wasn't a right taken away. It was never there. We also sometimes hear pro-lifers are not compassionate or loving or caring related to that. That's another myth. Jesus told his followers to love, even to love their enemies. Matthew 5:27 through 36. We're to be kind. We want to be compassionate, but we are compassionate for the child as well. By the way, it's hypocritical for some to support and promote abortion, and then to claim they're appalled by recent shootings and killing of children. I mean, how can you be against murder if you're for murder? That's ridiculous. It's also hypocritical, even ungodly, by the way, to speak up for animal rights if you're silent when it comes to the human rights related to abortion and the unborn. It's just hypocritical. But it goes back to what we talked about, those who call evil good and good evil. Make Making abortion illegal, this is the next myth. Making abortion illegal means there will no longer be safe abortions. You notice I use the same reference there. You shall not murder. There's no such thing as a safe abortion. There's no such thing. If an abortion is successful, at least one person doesn't leave that operating room alive. If the abortion is successful, the baby dies. So there is no such thing as a safe abortion. Abortion is fatal to the unborn, and sometimes, by the way, to the pregnant mothers as well. It can all harm their health and their emotional well-being also. But we know that if an abortion is, quote, successful, then a child is killed. Finally, this morning, let me answer quickly a third question. Why isn't the fight for good over for good? I'm afraid we'll rejoice and just be happy, oh, that's done. We need to understand something regarding abortion related to the overturning of Roe versus Wade. The murder of the unborn through abortion was not eliminated or outlawed, though it should have been. It wasn't. What the decision did was to return the jurisdiction over abortion to the individual states. So what that means, legally speaking, things are like they were before Roe versus Wade. States get to choose if abortion will be legal or not. Now, we mentioned earlier that prior to Roe versus Wade, some have said the majority of states have laws against it, but we've had 50 years of brainwashing that has taken place. And so it's going to be harder in various states, especially certain states. Some are even setting up to be safe havens for women who want to leave prohibited states and go there. And some companies are saying they'll pay for women to go as part of their health care provision, if you will. Sadly, the unborn are being treated much the same as slaves were before the Civil War. Prior to the Union victory, states were able to regulate the issue of slavery. So if a state thought it was acceptable for their citizens to own slaves, they could choose to do so. Of course, slavery was a national sin, and it was a blot on our nation, as is abortion. At this point, like the issue of slavery was prior to the Civil War, now we could talk about the Missouri Compromise, and that set some regulations for states coming into the Union. But basically, states had the right to decide. Those who promote abortion are no different than the slave owners of yesteryear. They're no different. They believe their rights trump the rights, the lives of other human beings. This is evil, it's immoral, it's ungodly, just as slavery was. Now the issue comes about that now abortion is going to have to be addressed in every state, individually. So the fight for life is far from over. We must continue to be vigilant. And by the way, as you think about that, notice that when political leaders change, then laws can change. So this is going to be fluid unless something else happens. This is going to be a fluid issue. Related to that, human hearts are still sinful. Human hearts are still sinful. There are still those who call evil good and good evil. There are those who oppose righteousness. There are those who oppose God himself. God's word tells us in Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? That familiar verse in Romans 3 tells us this, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So believers, while we're rejoicing, we know the fight for life and the fight for justice for the unborn is not over. We also know and we rejoice in the fact that God is a loving, forgiving, merciful God. Every one of us, we are sinners. We've been blessed to come to know Christ through someone sharing the gospel with us, but that's the only way we can find forgiveness for sin is through Christ. Romans 5 verse 8 says, but God demonstrates his own love toward us, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That's why Jesus came, because we are sinners. But he will redeem us. He can change hearts if we turn to him. Just before we close, watch this.
Seems like all I could see was the struggle. Haunted by ghosts that lived in my past, bound up in shackles of all my failures, wondering how long is this gonna last. Then you look at this prisoner and say to me, son, stop fighting a fight it's already been won. And I am redeemed. You set me free. So I'll shake off these heavy chains and wipe away every stain. I'm not who I used to be. I am redeemed. I'm redeemed. All my life I have been called unworthy, named by the voice of my shame and regret. But when I heard you whisper, child, lift up your head, I remember, oh God, you're not done with me yet. And I am redeemed. You set me free. So I'll shake off these heavy chains and wipe away every stain. Now I'm not who I used to be. Oh God, I'm not who I used to be. Jesus, I'm not who I used to be. 'Cause I am redeemed. Thank God, redeemed.
We're all guilty before the Lord, but we've been redeemed. God will give us a new beginning. If you do not know Christ, especially those who may be watching online, if you do not know Christ, you can be forgiven. We love you, and we want to see God's best for you. Let's stand together.